Hello and welcome to Accredited Real Estate Schools. I'm Bryan Church. I'm a California real estate broker and member of the Education Department at Accredited Real Estate Schools. And today we're going to talk about real property sales contracts. And a real property sales contract is a purchase contract and security device all in one between the vendor and the vendee. And let's explain what each one of these is, and then we'll explain how they work and how they're used in California. So the vendee is the buyer-borrower. This is the person who's buying the property and borrowing the money directly from the seller. The vendor is the seller who's the lender. And so the vendor is one who would keep the legal title to the property and loan the money to the vendee. So the vendee, who's the buyer-borrower, has what we call equitable title, which is merely possession of the property. And the vendor, the seller, who's also the lender on this, has what we call the legal title to it. And these are used a lot of times in California. If you don't use a deed of trust, then a real property sales contract might be used when the seller owns the property outright with no loans on it and may sell the property to the vendee, right? So the vendor sells the property to the vendee. The vendee has that equitable title, which is possession. They're buying the property and borrowing the money from the vendor, who's the seller and, of course, the lender on this. And so these are used sometimes not as commonly as deeds of trust. Deeds of trust are the most predominant type of security device in California for real estate loans, but these are used sometimes as well. Now, what happens is that the vendee makes payments to the vendor, and what happens is that as the vendee completes those payments and pays all the money off, then the vendor would take the legal title and would transfer it to the vendee, who then would own the equitable title possession and the legal title, and the seller or the vendor is out of it, and the buyer would then own the property. We use a grant deed to do that too. The seller wants to deed over that legal title. Now, what happens if the vendee stops making payments? Right, the buyers can't make the payments anymore, and to the vendor, then what happens is the vendor would ask the vendee to sign a quitclaim deed, quitting their claim, and then what that would do is remove that equitable title, move it back to the seller, who's the vendor, who then can sell it to someone else. Now, what happens if the vendee stops making payments and then skips town and you can't find him? Then the vendor would institute a quiet title action in court and ask the court to take that equitable title from the vendee, who's the buyer-borrower, and give it to the vendor, who's the seller-lender. Then, of course, the seller would then own the property without any equitable title out there, would own both legal and equitable title, and they can sell it to somebody else. Now, who uses these the most is Calvet actually uses them quite a bit. That's what their predominant device that they have is for Calvet. Now, how Calvet works is that a veteran who entered military service in California, not only do they have access to the VA, Department of Veterans Affairs, which is a federal program, but they also have access to Calvet. And with Calvet, what happens is they actually use the real property sales contract, and Calvet is the vendor, and the veteran is the vendee. Okay, so what ends up happening is that the veteran says, okay, I want to buy this house. Calvet buys the house. The legal title is in the name Calvet. Okay, and so the veteran becomes the vendee, which is the buyer-borrower on it, paying Calvet, who's the vendor. And of course, when the veteran completes all the payments, pays it off, then Calvet would deed over the legal title to the vendee, who's the veteran. And the thing about here, the key point on the state exam is that when you have a Calvet loan, title is held by California Department of Veterans Affairs. So what happens is it's not, which is Calvet, and it's not held in the buyer's, the veteran's name because of that reason. Now, the real property sales contract is called a whole bunch of different names on the state exam in California. It's conditional installment contract, conditional sales contract, legal sales contract, real property sales contract. That's what Calvet calls it. Land contract of sale, contract of sale, agreement of sale, and they even call it a land contract by itself. So there's a whole bunch of different names that are used. It's all the same thing. So don't be confused when you see these on the exam. That's all they're talking about, is that real property sales contract that we have just been talking about. So go ahead and enjoy the rest of your day. It's Accredited Real Estate Schools, Bryan Church.